Here at Sydney Town Hall, nothing was spared in this opulent instrument, the magnum opus of Thomas Hill. On paper, this huge instrument looks like it might have a classical core with 3 choruses going up to mixtures, but the reality is rather different. Let's have a listen to the great chorus here, right up to its 3 separate mixture stops. A very bright, bold Germanic sound. And then compare that with both the swell and the choir choruses. And you'll hear that the great is very dominant. In fact, one English organ historian said, perhaps rather tongue-in-cheek, that this is a huge one-manual organ. In other words, the great is so dominant that the other manuals colour it, and they rely on coupling for their power and effect to some degree. This, I think, is an element of a German organ of the late 19th century rather than the French. And it suggests that maybe Hill was trying to find his own voice here at Sydney, away from the London organ mafia. He could express himself as he wanted to tonally. And Germany seems to be perhaps more of an influence than France, and we notice this in the tutties. So if I draw the full great, and even if I couple the tubas to it, as would have been done at exceptional climactic moments, those mixtures still cut through in the tutty. Again, the influence of Edmund Schulze, most likely. However, let's not overstate its German core, because we have lots of French colours showing a debt to Cavaillé Carl and the French Romantic generation. Let's start with the flûte harmonique, the harmonic flute on the great. Not the same scale as the French harmonic flute, but obviously inspired by the French genre. Also the voix humaine, the vox humana, this time a solo stop on the choir. And there is a huge plethora of English solo colours, often quite delicate. The oboe, the clarinet, a whole army of strings and gentle diapasons. Let's just listen to a few of them. So there we heard a mixture of oboes and clarinets and a bassoon on the choir and solo divisions. And here are some gentle flutes, the Doppelflöte, two-mouth flute on the solo. A Hohlflöte, again notice the German nomenclature on the choir. And some beautiful diapason colours which work as solos and not just as part of a chorus, for example, on the solo division. and so forth. We have the typical English army of high-pressure reeds here, a tuba which is perhaps rather more brilliant than you might expect of a late 19th century English tuba. Again, perhaps Hill left to his own devices in terms of his own personal tonal preferences. And with its 4-foot and 16-foot neighbours. Just with those tubas alone, we get a flavour of just how heroic this instrument is as it pushes beyond the forte into the fortissimo and beyond. One of the most famous features, which just shows this opulence and also the huge dynamic range, is the 64-foot contra trombone made of wood. There are only a few 64-foots in the world, at least in real terms. There are harmonic 64-foots in other instruments, but this is unique in terms of its place in the ensemble. Hill envisaged the 64-foot to sound like a drum roll underneath the tutti and louder combinations. We'll listen to it on its own. It's a fascinating sound. You'll hear it almost sort of goes off the spectrum and sounds, dare I say, almost industrial on its own. Some slightly erratic speech today in this very dry room in the current temperature. But let's listen to that now under the full pedal with the 64-foot trombone. So we're getting some idea of the sheer power and heroism of the tutti. So let's hear it. It's a hugely powerful sound, but also an extremely musical sound. Blended, brilliant, engaging. And it's no wonder that this organ has achieved something of a cult status.